Good evening, everyone who will be watching us on YouTube, because with these guests who are here, we already spoke a lot, just, just last 15 minutes. Welcome to Agile with Ukraine number 11. 11, like elevator in some regions say. So today with us is Stephanie Ockerman with a great topic she will present a bit later. And Andrei, as usual, my partner in crime in this initiative, and some guests who are with us every time. It's Alona, Justin. You can see them on previous video on YouTube, so we're happy to see new faces also, and not very new for us. I will start presenting what's going on now in Ukraine, and then I will give a word to Andrei to show a bit about our initiative with whom we are partners, I mean uniters. Let me try to share my screen, because I was playing with animation and I'm not very expert to play with one screen. Oh, it works. Can you see it? Yeah. So now not very positive pictures, but it's reality and we want to spread it around the world. So you can see the beautiful cities of Ukraine with these troops who say that they come to save us and protect. So they are protecting Kharkiv, Central Square. They are protecting Mariupol. Almost 90% or okay 70% of the city were Russian speaking, and no one was conflicting with them. And now they're saved by Russia. Also Chernigiv, Sumy, and few more photos just to compare how it was in Kharkiv. Faculty of Economics, Kharkiv National University before invasion and after. Kiev, maybe some army or snipers were sitting in this house in residential, just flats of civilian people. We don't know, but we can see the consequence of Russian invasion. Here it's in Kiev, almost city center. Not just a city center, but not far from. This is the largest transport aircraft in the world, called Mria An-25, also destroyed fully. This is absolutely new um, shopping mall. Shopping mall nearby, absolutely new residential complex Warszawski. I have two flats there nearby, 300 meters from there. One for my grandma and one is the flat where I was grown. Thanks God, exactly my buildings are okay, but everything around is totally destroyed by these savers. This is also Kiev. You can see this new business center just opened last year, before and after. Before and after. You can see Chernigiv, absolutely new residential district. I believe that these people maybe take some money from banks to buy new flats. Now they were saved by Russian government, thanks. We can see Bucha, and we don't want to be like to create too much impressions with Bucha because it's really hard to see. You can find by your own by this hashtag, but please do it after the speech, not now. It might be too harsh, but we find a good way how to explain before and after about Bucha. So here is what Yandex, it's a Russian Google, so to say. So it's their local top most popular search engine. So what are they now showing for Bucha request? And on the right side, you can see what is Google showing for Bucha now. So this war is not only on the streets, but also in the media. So be careful with news you are looking at, because there are billions of dollars were invested to create a proper picture to the world, explaining that it's not so harsh and civilian people is almost not affected, but that's absolutely not true. And it was before, and now we can see this Bucha. It's 20 kilometers from Kiev and 15 kilometers from my house. And this is Zahar. He is 11 years old. He is from Bucha. And that's what is our children drawing right now. Instead of drawing, I don't know, flowers, parents, families, they are drawing tanks, war machines, missiles, because he have seen from his window when it started, helicopters were there exactly destroying the Mria plane. So it was observed from his window. Now he's in safe place. He's in western region of Ukraine. He's drawing these pictures for my another social initiative, UA Kids Today. You can find a lot of children drawings on this Instagram account. And something very personal. It's my photos of the end of January. We together with wife and my two children and dog were in beautiful park 25 kilometers from Kiev called Dobro Park. You can see how it was just created, also opened 2 years ago. Very big territory. In the summer, it's tulips exhibition, all other nice flowers exhibition. And you can see this beautiful house at the right side. It was residential of Santa Claus, and how it looks like now after the invasion. So you can compare what Russian world can bring to our territories. Yeah, unfortunately, that's how our country feel right now, and we will rebuild all the houses. It's not a big problem; it's just financial problem, and but people are also affected. Civilian people are also affected. And that's why when we've spoken with Andrei how we as an agile coach can help our country, because to say the truth, we are not the most prospective soldiers in this country. We decide that we need somehow to invest our skills, and we do like to educate people, to coach people, to mentor people, and to connect people who have what to share, who have a lot of experience and wisdom, and to connect them with people who want to develop their skills continuously and to earn more and more and more new insights, learnings, and knowledge. And we've created Agile with Ukraine in partnership with Uniters Foundation. They are helping Ukraine with different stuff. Andrei will tell more about this part. And we want to just remind that Ukraine is not on another planet. It's not so far from Europe, not more than 1,000 kilometers from almost all Western European countries. And we are fighting not for local some questions, issues. We are fighting for the democracy and freedom in the whole world right now.
So we are partner. So we thought what kind of contribution we could do the most, and there were a lot of foundations who are operating right now. A lot of foundations in Ukraine and also a lot of foundations in Europe. And I personally know people with whom in 2014, when the first Russian aggression started after the annexion of Crimea and the war in Donbass, together with these people, we were volunteering and we were looking for a lot of stuff that we could bring back to Ukraine to help our people and help our army. And United Foundation actually started working right after Maidan in 2014. And they've been supporting Ukraine for the whole 8 years of Russian aggression in Donbass. Besides just supporting Ukrainian army and Ukrainian people, they also continue to support kids of those who lost their fathers in that war. They have a great initiative called Christmas Without a Dad, dedicated to children who lost their fathers in the battle for the freedom of Ukraine. And right now, this foundation acts on its max speed. Actually, today I finished an APS course. I was teaching an APS course. And usually I bring a lot of examples for people from IT, from what I've seen, from what I implemented. Yesterday and today, the majority of examples of continuous integration, continuous deployment, of working as a team were from this foundation. I have personally witnessed how they're working. And since the beginning of the war, the first truck, the first aid to Ukraine went from Poland to Ukraine on the 26th of February, 2 days after it happened. And since that day up till 27th, you can see the numbers, how much help they provided to Ukraine. Just think of the number, 3,000 tons of help within 1 month. And those are the people who have regular jobs. Those are the people who have families. They just united and they are working as hard as possible. And all we can do to them right now is just to provide them with additional funding from the people. That's why we also created this initiative to help Ukrainian people with the donations. So you will get the knowledge today. but also please don't forget to donate, because those are Ukrainian people who set up this foundation for 8 long years they've been supporting. And right now, they don't have work-life balance. They spend the entire time at the foundation. They are sleeping over there as well. So please help the foundation. Okay? Thank you very much. Now let's go to fun part and more valuable part. So we give the mic to Stephanie. And before Stephanie will talk, I will also recommend a book that Stephanie co-authored. It's called Mastering Professional Scrum. And every Scrum Master should read it, honestly. It's a cool one.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into that book. So I always appreciate hearing that people have found it valuable, that they've been able to take action from reading it. So thank you so much for that little plug. All right. So everybody can see my PowerPoint presentation. I'm good. All right. Excellent. Okay. So today, I'm going to talk about the 4 mistakes we make with goals and offer a few ideas for how to fix them. So just to start out, I know some of you, and a few of you may not know me, so just a quick little intro. My name is Stephanie Ockerman. I run an agility training and enablement business called AgileWithUkraine. And in addition to facilitating interactive exercise-driven learning in the form of professional Scrum training, I'm passionate about creating accessible online learning and powerful transformation experiences that go beyond Scrum to help Scrum Masters fully unleash their unique leadership power and find more confidence and ease while creating the impact we want to have. And the reason this specific talk is important to me is because I feel like I've spent a lot of my life being sucked into the culture of goal setting and achievement. And I'm not saying goals and wanting to achieve things is inherently bad, but the way it's often done in companies and even how we've maybe been socialized to do it in our personal lives can be a bit toxic. And it often works against us, taking focus away from the things that truly matter and preventing us from taking advantage of new opportunities. And this is why I've been a proponent of Scrum.org's evidence-based management framework for a few years now. It gives companies tangible guidance on how to break out of those unhelpful, potentially even toxic patterns and how they're using goals and measures. And so EBM addresses how to leverage goals, measures, and empiricism effectively to continuously improve customer outcomes, organizational capabilities, and business results. And so this talk will bring some components of EBM to life. And if this resonates, I encourage you to read the EBM guide on Scrum.org's website. And if you have read my blog posts or if you get my newsletter, you know that I tend to think about things holistically. I like to talk about agility in product and work-oriented ways, but also how it shows up in other aspects of our lives. So I'll be doing that here because agility is about navigating complexity and unpredictability, and that just describes so much of life. So the more opportunities we have to practice agility, the more it will become ingrained in our thinking and our natural approach. All right. So we do value goal setting in our society. We think it's a sign of being driven, hardworking, and productive. And I would say that I am a planner by nature. I am organized, I like goals, and goals can be super helpful if we use them effectively and have a healthy relationship with goals. And so what I want to start out with is giving you 60 seconds to think about what are all of the goals that impact you, right? So you could think about personal goals you may have. It could be health or lifestyle related, or an experience or a thing that you're aiming for or that you want. Consider individual goals that you might have in your job, goals that are related to a team that you're part of. Maybe it's a work team, maybe it's not a work team. Consider organizational goals that you are impacted by as well. So just take 60 seconds, feel free to just write them down on paper. If you have a digital note-taking tool, I'll give you 60 seconds. All right. First of all, I'm curious about how many goals you wrote down. So in the chat, or yeah, what you're doing there, give us a visual if you have enough fingers to do that. Give us an idea. How many goals do we have out there? I saw 4 from is it Aliona? Aliona. All right. Anyone else? Okay. Yeah. 3. Anyone else want to share? Okay, 5. Yeah, so we've got a range here. Yeah, so kind of maybe from 2 to 5. So it's always an interesting question, I think, because part of goals is to help create some focus for us. And I think that occasionally we might find ourselves realizing, like, how many different goals am I aiming towards? So that's a little bit of a, a hint around how we leverage goals. So I like to make things as relatable to your context and as actionable as possible. So as I take you through each of the 4 mistakes, the 4 common mistakes we make with goals, you can take note, now that you've got those goals written down, you can take note of where you see any of those mistakes showing up, maybe even just a little, because sometimes it's not like a big obvious thing, but it's like, oh, okay, like maybe there's some opportunity here. And then towards the end, I'm going to share some tips on how to fix our goals. And maybe fix is the wrong terminology, right? Improve them so that they're useful rather than maybe oppressive or actually sending us in the wrong direction. And then I will open it up for Q&A at the end as well. Okay, so I also have a special offer for people who are interested in diving deeper with evidence-based management with a workshop that I'm teaching in May. So I'll give you details about that at the end as well. Okay, all right, so mistake number 1. Goals are not focused on customer outcomes, all right? So instead of focusing on customer outcomes, goals might be too focused on activities and outputs. So let me give you an example of an output-focused goal. A product team may have a goal focused on delivering a specific feature set to customers. However, there's no guarantee that feature set will actually improve the customer's experience. And how we deliver that feature set, the decisions that we make along the way about what exactly we build and how best to build it, what will that be guided by, right? So if we focus the goal on what outcomes we want to create for the customer, then we now have a goal that doesn't just put us in the mode of cranking out the work, but making sure that what we do is in alignment with customer value. So let me give you an example of an activity-focused goal. A recruiting team may have a goal focused on the number of interviews they schedule. However, if they are not quality candidates, the experience is likely to be poor for everyone involved, right? So now let's look at a personal example. If we were to, if we set personal goals related to reaching a specific salary, that's really an output focused goal. And how could that lead us astray and negatively impact us? Well, we might make a decision to take a job solely because it offers the highest salary, even though it doesn't fulfill us or offer other important benefits like opportunities for growth, or things that are important for our work-life balance. And it could even make us miserable. And we might find ourselves also continuing to raise that bar because we start to look at salary as our measure of success. And maybe our worthiness gets a little wrapped up in that too. Okay. So I like money. I want to get paid what I'm worth. But I have worked to reframe monetary goals as desires or targets that provide context in my situation, but not the goal in itself. All right. Okay, so mistake number 2, we don't measure what matters, right? So let's take a step back and remind ourselves of why do we measure, right? What is the purpose of measuring? Measures are essentially the transparent information that helps us understand progress and guides our decisions, essentially supporting effective inspection and adaptation. And what we measure will influence behavior. So often I see organizations measuring activities and outputs, but missing outcomes, right? The number of hours worked or budget burned, those are activities, does not tell you much about your ability to deliver value. And that focus on measuring activities isn't very useful in guiding our decisions. And it doesn't even help us really understand our progress towards a goal. And even measures like customer orders filled or velocity or throughput, they don't tell you much about the customer experience. So that focus on measuring outputs does not give us the feedback we need to actually guide us in how we move forward, or do we keep going? Do we pivot? Do we stop and change direction? We also need to make sure we have multiple measures to get a better idea of what is happening. So when we're doing complex work in complex and unpredictable environments, one measure doesn't often give us enough perspectives to truly understand like what is happening, right? And how we may need to or want to be adapting to changes in our market, changes in, that are just happening in our organization, with customer trends, those sorts of things. And so an example of this is we might use Net Promoter Score, NPS, to understand customer satisfaction. Great thing to know. But if we have no other measures about, for example, how customers are using our product or service, then it will be difficult to know what may be impacting changes in NPS or a lack of change in NPS. Right? So let me share another example that I see a lot with individuals. Have you ever felt the pressure to get more certifications and read every book about agility that's been written ever? I have. Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with learning and growing and earning certifications to validate our learning and growth. I mean, I teach courses that help people earn certifications for a living. I have written a book that I would like people to read because I think it provides value. However, if we're only measuring the number of certifications we earn and the number of books we read, we might be losing sight of why we're doing it in the first place. And then we might just end up going through the motions, rushing through the experience without intentionally applying the learning. And then we haven't really gained much benefit from the time and effort we put into that process. Right. So next up is mistake number 3. We don't inspect and adapt goals frequently enough or at all. This was a huge aha for me. goals are not supposed to be fixed and unchanging, right? Remember, goals are all based on assumptions. And this means we need to be validating our goals frequently. Is this still the right thing to focus on? What have I learned that helps me clarify this goal? And consider that goal list that you just made, right? Are they open to change as we learn more? Or do we treat those goals as fixed? Thinking about personal goals as well as our organizational goals, our team goals, maybe the individual goals we have from our job, the work that we're doing, right? How frequently have we changed those? How frequently have we moved towards one, realized I've gotten far enough, and now this is actually the goal over here, right? Let's pivot. Okay, we're allowed to do that. They're not fixed. Now, the pandemic, of course, provides a powerful example many of us can relate to when it comes to needing to change course with our goals, both at an organizational level, a team level, and definitely for me in my personal life, right? But it shouldn't take a world-changing and hugely disruptive event to trigger us to look at our goals, to clarify them based on what we're learning, or even change them. An example I run across frequently in organizations is what I call the dreaded annual portfolio planning cycle. Anyone have one of those or been part of one of those? The dreaded annual portfolio planning cycle. Yeah. So the way I see this show up is, sometime in maybe late third quarter, organizations have all of their leaders come up with the list of initiatives that they will do next year with budgets and schedules based on their capacity planning. And these leaders, of course, go to their teams, they ask them to create the high-level plans and the estimates. And I've seen this activity consume massive amounts of people's time, lasting a month or even 4 months, even 6 months I've seen as well when I ask people about these cycles. And it tends to be really stressful because, well, it's pretty damn hard to predict the future and plan a year's worth of work. And this plan is often then used to create fixed goals for individuals and departments for the next year. And that's why we get real stressed about it, because we're like, well, this plan has to be right. It's like, that doesn't even make sense in a complex and unpredictable world. However, that's what happens when we set fixed goals and don't allow inspection and adaptation, right? And ultimately, this also creates a lot of waste, because those detailed plans are often pretty much useless just a couple months into the next year. And when people's goals are fixed for the year, that encourages them to set goals based on things they think they have a better chance of controlling, which are not customer outcomes, right? This leads people to defining solutions up front and creating estimates based on those solutions. And we not only lose sight of customer outcomes, but this shuts down creativity and innovation. And so in EBM, the concept of the experiment loop is introduced as a way to recognize that we make progress towards goals in a series of small experiments. And based on the results of those experiments, we then decide, do we keep going? Do we pivot? Do we stop? And this includes possibly refining, clarifying, updating, or even completely changing the goals. All right, so we're up to mistake number 4. We focus too much on the practices for creating and aligning goals. Similar to what I teach with Scrum, there are no best practices when it comes to goals in a complex environment. And with any practice, you can use it well or you can use it poorly. And when I say practices, I mean using structures like SMART goals, right? So specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-related, if you're familiar with the acronym SMART, right? That's what I mean, like a structure. Or another example of a practice is OKRs, objectives and key results. So these practices can be helpful, but it depends on context and how effectively we use the practices. So if you are using OKRs, take a look at your objectives and ask yourself if they're customer outcome focused. Do you inspect and adapt the objectives, or does the organization lock everything in place for a year and expect everyone to just perfectly plan, right? And I actually, when I taught an EBM class a few months ago, that was one of the key things one of my students brought out was she said, I'm going to go, this is what my company does. And she was a manager. And she was like, so I'm going to, when we're about to do the cycle, and she said, so I'm going to come at them with like, okay, here's what we're doing for my group, my team. And we need to come back and assess these and see if they're still the right goals and inspect and adapt them in 3 months. So she actually like went back and kind of negotiated around like, hey, and doesn't it make sense, since we don't really know what's going to happen, to, you know, inspect these again in a few months and see what we've learned and what we might want to change, right? So that's a small thing. But yeah, like bring it up, ask, we can do those things, okay? And when I coach my clients on effective goals, I offer many ways to look at goals, and I encourage them not to just pick one approach or one template. You have to do what feels right in your context. And you don't want to be too rigid and dictate a singular process throughout a large dynamic organization, right? That's not likely to make sense for everyone in that organization. A lot of times organizations do that because they think having like one way, one big structure and process of doing it is going to create alignment. But the reality is goal alignment happens through conversation and creating shared understanding. It's not about the words on a goal alignment sheet, right? It's through conversation and doing this not just once a year, but frequently enough for your changing context, right? Whatever that needs to look like for your context. Okay. All right. So the recap here are 4 mistakes. Goals are not focused on customer outcomes. Number 2, we don't measure what matters. Number 3, we don't inspect and adapt goals frequently enough or at all. And then number 4, we focus too much on the practices for creating and aligning goals. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit of like what's bubbling up for you right now as you look at your goals and you've been thinking through these 4 mistakes. Let's go ahead and maybe share in the chat if you're comfortable. 1, 2, 3, or 4. Which of these is showing up strongest in your world? 1, 2, 3, or 4. 1. I see a visual 2. Right. Yeah, and you'll even see, I saw another 2 there. Yeah, you'll see that these kind of like relate to each other a little bit too. So if we're not focused on customer outcomes, we're likely not measuring what matters as well. Or maybe we also have the challenge of only having one measure. Yeah, absolutely. These can all be present in different levels. Okay. All right. So I hope you're not feeling too depressed about realizing our goals might not be great right now. All right. Because we are going to talk about some tips for effectively using goals. Okay. All right. So tip number 1, ask questions to get to the why until you get to the real objective, a customer outcome, ideally, right? And so the question could be, so why is this important? Another way to tackle it is, why do our customers care about that? Or which of our customers care about that? Or what will that enable for our customers? Right? So there's many ways to ask the question and kind of relate it to your context, what's going to make sense. Questions like these can open up the conversation, right? Because again, goal alignment is about conversation, creating shared understanding, right? And these small things, when we try to get to the bigger why, they really help people kind of dig in. And that can also help us realize like, oh, wait, like I thought it meant this, or I thought this is why we were doing it. Great. That's exactly the conversation we wanted to create. Okay. So an example of this, of how we take a goal, ask some questions, and maybe find a better goal or a more effective goal. We could have a goal of, and this might be relatable to a lot of people, make virtual training available for all courses by the end of the year. Okay, that sounds like a good goal. Doesn't sound like a bad goal. But when we ask the question of like, why is that important? right? And we try to have conversation around, what customer outcomes are we trying to create and who cares about that? Why is it important? We might get to something like enable people to learn from wherever they are, whenever they need it. And so this helps us hone in more on the customer experience of the solution, not just flip a switch, all the classes are now virtual. Okay. And if we make virtual training available, but it's not able to achieve the learning objectives, well, that will become a problem. But we can all check the box saying we did our goals for the year, right? So being more clear on the why helps us make decisions along the way about what value we create and how we create it. And it also can help us dig into things like, well, where should we start, right? Like, what do we want to really hone in on? Where do we have the best opportunity to enable people to learn from wherever they are, whenever they need it, right? Where does that make sense? And we might discover along the way that it might not make sense for some courses, right? And so like, that's what it kind of opens up, is the opportunity to have those conversations and even create new potential creative solutions. So that it's not just, hey, make it virtual, but maybe there's other things that we can do that enable people to learn from wherever they are, whenever they need it, right? Okay, so tip number 2, do not let the measure become the goal. So for example, if an organization sets a goal to increase the number of new customers by 30%, right? So that's an example. And I see this a lot in a lot of similar, but like changed for the company's context. For starters, it's a little vague because there's probably many things we could do to try to move that number, right? So it doesn't really help create any focus or alignment in the organization. And there's likely things we could do that might hit that number in the short term, but create a longer term issue. Like if we get a bunch of people in for a trial who aren't the right fit, and they're most likely going to cancel at the end of the trial. All right. So being mindful that we're not setting a goal that's really just make the measure different or improve the measure, right? And so even if we do have a goal, right, that's not the measure, sometimes the emphasis on hitting a target measure kind of becomes the goal because that's what's so emphasized, and we start to lose sight of the why, and we just focus on hitting the target. And so remember, what we measure is going to influence behavior. What we measure and how we use those measures are going to influence behaviors in the organization, often in ways we aren't intending, especially if those measures are incentivized. All right. So tip number 3. Oh, this is a fun one. I struggle with this. Let go of control. All right. We have to frequently remind ourselves and help each other remember that we cannot control the outcomes. We cannot predict the future. I mean, as a Scrum Master, I literally teach people about complexity and unpredictability for a living. I talk about how we cannot perfectly plan. We cannot control all the variables that impact us. Some of you do this too in the Agile world, right? And yet we often find ourselves falling into the trap, right? Desiring control, needing to know, needing to have all the right answers, needing to get it right. So have some empathy for yourself and others. This is an ongoing journey in my experience. It's a daily practice. All right. So we have to reality check ourselves periodically. And for me, like you have to figure out like what are your own signals to yourself, or even behaviors you notice in the organization where people start to get a little grippy, like they start gripping on to like, but we have to get there. We have to control it. Right? It's like, wait a second, let's take that step back. Let's reality check. Let's remind ourselves, right? How do we approach complexity and unpredictability with empiricism, right? That's our guide, and effective goals help us have effective empiricism. All right. So tip number 4, clarify assumptions. So this helps us see what we need to validate or learn as we are moving towards a goal. And that, of course, makes us more open to inspecting and adapting the goal frequently enough. Like when we bring out all these, like, well, what are these assumptions we're making? Okay, well, then we can ask questions like, well, how could we validate that assumption, or how could we learn more to make sure we're moving in the right direction, that really is the right thing to focus on? And so that question alone implies, oh yeah, we're going to inspect, right? So that we can adapt based on what we learn. And this is especially helpful when we have output focused goals. We assume a certain solution is the right or the best solution, right? There's assumptions baked into that. So for example, we might start with a goal to create a mobile app for our product. And that's an output focused goal. Well, there will likely be a lot of differences in what we build and how we build it if we start to clarify assumptions. Who do we think is going to use the mobile app? What value propositions are we assuming the mobile app will provide, and to which of our customers? Right? So clarifying assumptions not just helps us hone in on what to build, but it also reminds us that we might want to test out those assumptions sooner rather than later. And so, for example, we might assume that a mobile app will attract a new market, like digital nomads, let's say. Well, what's the smallest thing we could build that will help us validate that assumption? Okay. All right. Next up, I got lots of tips for you. Tip number 5, look for goals that create conflict between teams and departments in an organization. Okay. So this often happens because we lack a customer outcome focused goal at a higher level to create alignment in the organization. So for example, an infrastructure group may have a goal related to how quickly they can turn around internal customer requests. And so, by the way, this is also where the measure becomes the goal as well. And this causes them to create an intake process that requires every single detail to be documented before the request is submitted. And so product delivery teams who are trying to be flexible and responsive to customer needs to build iteratively and incrementally, right? They start to run into issues when the infrastructure team doesn't want to have any in-progress work for too long, right? So they push back. They're saying, no, we need all the documentation. We need all the upfront analysis before they'll assign anyone to work with that product team. Yeah, this might be a real world example from my experience. Yeah, but you can imagine how this shows up in other ways, other areas of organizations that end up with like kind of conflicting goals that make them like not want to collaborate or like actually fight a little bit against each other. Yeah. All right, so next up, tip number 6, ask when we will come back and revisit to look at our progress, look at what has changed in our environment, and decide if that goal still makes sense to pursue, and to clarify it based on what we've learned. So establishing a cadence to inspect and adapt your goals at different levels, right? That's what we're talking about. So you may have a big, hairy, audacious goal in your life or in an organization, something that's maybe going to take a year or a few years to achieve even. And so you're going to still want to inspect that at some point, right? Like what makes sense? Is it quarterly? Is it monthly? I don't know. It depends on your context, right? But it's probably not weekly, right? Different levels of goals, different timeframes of goals, right? So the further something may be out into the future, that will have a different cadence of what makes sense for an inspecting and adapting cycle, that feedback loop. So start somewhere, right? And inspect and adapt your process as you go, right? So you may not know exactly what the right cadence is. Well, pick something, start there, right? And then inspect and adapt your actual process as you go, right? Is this frequent enough? Does this feel too frequent that it's creating waste, right? So next up, tip number 7, last tip, stop treating goal achievement as the sign of success or a measure of worthiness. Stop treating goal achievement as the sign of success or a measure of worthiness. It's just a thing that happened or didn't happen. To me, the measure of success is how well we used our goals. Did we frequently inspect our progress towards them? And how well did we adapt based on what we were learning and what was changing around us? Did we clarify our goals as we learned more? Did we change our goals when it became apparent that we needed to pivot? To me, that's how I look at success, both in my work, but also in my personal life. Okay. Did we do the best we could, leveraging empiricism and an agile mindset, staying open and curious to navigate complexity and unpredictability, right? And my worthiness has nothing to do with what I do or don't do, what I achieve or don't achieve. And we all need to remember that so that we can leverage goals effectively instead of them turning into like a toxic thing that can actually cause a lot of negative ripple effects for individuals and teams and organizations. Okay. Love seeing that one resonated in the chat. All right. So those are my tips. And I do know that it can feel overwhelming to change how an organization is using their goals. A lot of people are like, but I don't control that process. But you can influence this by simply asking questions that help people have better conversations about what really matters. And even if everything doesn't change overnight, be persistent and trust that you are creating an impact. You are showing people a different perspective and you're creating shared understanding. Even if nothing changes in terms of that big thing that you don't necessarily have control over, right? Like you are creating impact. People are hearing you. People are like, huh, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way, right? And it may take time, but it does matter. Keep showing up, right? Keep helping people, keep getting creative about how we create these conversations, right? Start putting these tips into practice where you can. In your personal life, maybe it's a community organization you're part of, right? Which we heard in our intro a little bit about that, and with your Agile team. And look for those opportunities to help leaders in your organization be more open and curious about possibilities when it comes to using goals effectively. All right. And so I do want to we have a little bit of time to play with here, and I'm curious if anybody would like to share. And I also want to note that the donation information is in the chat. I have, before I like fully open it to just like general Q&A, I would like to come back to those goals that you identified and what you were noting as we were going through the mistakes, what we were noting as maybe like something we could do. I'm going to move us back to the tips for more effectively using goals. I'm curious about these tips. Which one feels like, oh, that's super powerful. I see an opportunity to do that. Anyone want to share? Feel free to drop it in the chat or take yourself off mute. Would love to hear a little bit about this.
I can
Yeah.
go. Yeah, well, obviously for me, the stop treating goal achievement as the sign of success is the most powerful one. Especially if you're sort of slightly, tiny little bit perfectionist. It's very, very, very hard to do, which brings me to the item number 3 about letting go of control. It actually takes a lot of willpower to me, both in private life and in work, to do that. So yeah, it's very good reminders. With everything else, I think it's a little bit easier to stop, review, and ask why, etc. But all in all, especially in business, when it comes to conversation with the more senior management, who were super supportive and understanding when we were revisiting them interim, the goals in interim, they were like, yeah, but then at the end of the day, some other guy comes, I don't know, some from financial department, and is like, what the hell? How come, etc. So yeah, a little bit tough.
Yeah, and that takes us right back to that. I call it like patience and persistence, Like we have to patiently persist. It's like meet people where they are, but also like call them forward, right? Like call them forward to change, continue to be a little bit annoying maybe, but also creative in how we like keep poking. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Yeah, so I see the note in here, like more language to help teams and organizations. Yeah, like, so sometimes we just have to say things in different ways, find like, what's the thing that's going to resonate with this leader, with this team. And then also even like in our families or, you know, like where we have goals in other aspects of our lives, like getting creative about how we talk about it. Because at the end of the day, it's about creating that shared understanding, having those conversations, getting to what really matters. Yeah. Love that. All right. So I do want to share with you, as I mentioned when I set this up, that this is inspired by evidence-based management. EBM is an agile approach to help leaders guide their teams towards continuously improving customer outcomes, organizational capabilities, and business results. It focuses on customer value and intentional experimentation to systematically improve the organization's performance and achieve their strategic goals. And EBM is something that an individual Scrum team could apply. It can be helpful, you know, to look at it in a product specific way, but you can also look at it at other levels. So it can be complementary to Scrum, but it's also bigger than that, right? Leveraging our goals, our measures, and empiricism to help ourselves navigate the complexities that we're dealing with. All right. So the offer I wanted to make is I am teaching a one-day PAL EBM workshop in May 13th. And I'm offering there's 3 seats available for this offer. If you were like, hey, I'm going to do this anyways, this is great. Well, go ahead and enroll and use this coupon code Ukraine 15, and you're going to save 15%. And I will be donating the revenue, the full amount of that to Agile with Ukraine, to the Uniters Foundation. So kind of like a double win for everyone. I'm hoping that's kind of the intention here. So there's 3 seats available for that offer. Ukraine 15 is the coupon code to register for that. I realized I do not have a link anywhere for that. I will drop that in the Zoom chat right now that I'm thinking about it. Let's see here. I can do that. There we
We
go.
will also add it to the description of the video.
Yeah.
Just link under the video on YouTube.
Yeah,
Perfect.
we're gonna share it on social media, Stephanie.
Perfect. Awesome. So hopefully that's kind of a win-win for everyone if this is something that's resonating with you and you want to go deeper. Super excited to teach. I love teaching this class as well because we do get to go deeper. And at this point, I do want to open it up a bit for some Q&A. And also, you know, like if you want to bring in any examples, we could do a little bit of workshopping for a few minutes here. Anybody have any questions or want to share?
Hi, Stephanie. Good talk today. I'm already going to your course in May.
That's right. I recognized your name and I was like, which course are you signed up for?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'm. Anyway, about goals. Can we bring this back to a team level?
Yeah.
So if we talk about the sprint goal,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you've mentioned this, but I know a lot of the Scrum trainers have mentioned this, but we only need to have one sprint goal, like one backlog item or sprint backlog item, whichever we want to say. Do you agree with that? You know?
Yeah. So I love that you asked this question too, because like as a professional Scrum trainer, I'm always like, I want to make sure nobody walks away with like something I said meaning something different. So yeah, with sprint goals, one thing I do want to say about sprint goals is we don't change those. You know, so I talk about, you know, in this context, I talk about, you know, our goals need to be open to change. The reason we don't change the sprint goal is because it's such a short time horizon. And so if we did open it up to change, we'd be changing direction every other day because of the latest, you know, urgent need from this stakeholder, that stakeholder. So with sprint goals, we don't change them. However, we might fail to meet them, right, for whatever reason. And to me, that kind of does go back to what we talk about in this talk around, like, it doesn't mean you're a bad team, right? There's information there, right? It helps us inspect and adapt. But yeah, to your point, focus. We need some focus. Now, I do have similar to, I think what is maybe behind your question is, at the end of the day, like, we work on different things. It's not like all coherent. What do we do then? Do we just pick one of those product backlog items? And it's like, yeah, you can do that. That's a valid solution. I would still encourage people to think about, like, if that product backlog item is very output focused, maybe we can still, kind of align around, well, what outcome do we think that's going to create? Right. And so I do encourage teams, when I'm teaching about sprint goals, to think about three things. One is, does this give us a sense of purpose, right? Like, does this get us excited to come to work? Does it get our stakeholders excited to come to the sprint review? And a lot of times that's really what drives a little bit towards customer outcome, right? Like something that like customers can care about, that we feel value in our work because, customers or users are going to get a benefit. Right. So like purpose is number one. And then number two is focus. But then number three comes into play too, which is flexibility. And so this does go back to what I was talking about, where if we try to like pre-solution versus focus on the outcome we're trying to create, right, that actually limits creativity. It limits potential innovation. So yeah, like with what you're talking about, you can do that. I still encourage people to try to dig into like the outcome side of things. Is that helpful?
Always helpful. Thank you.
Awesome.
Well, that was super helpful to me. Thank you, Justin, for asking this question. And thank you, Stephanie, for this little phrase of, well, we don't change the sprint goal, but we are okay to not meet it, which brings it to that item the last item.
Yeah, it doesn't mean we're bad or we did something wrong. We might have done something wrong, but that doesn't mean we're a bad team. It means we're going to learn from it, right? And we can't learn if we aren't given the space to not be perfect, right? Yeah.
I wanted to return to the beginning of your presentation and that thing you said about the difference between the outcome and the output.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quite sure I caught it.
Yeah. So with outcomes, we're kind of talking about like customer outcomes. Like, what does the customer gain from this? Output is more of like, we're building features. We're delivering services. Right. Like, so it's more of an output versus like the outcome is the benefit we might gain.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now it does. Sorry, didn't catch it the first time.
Yeah, no worries. Good clarification. Yeah.
Stephanie, do you think teams themselves should set themselves like team goals?
It can be used. Are you meaning kind of like a longer time horizon, not specific to the work?
Yeah, we want to get better, so we're going to set ourselves a goal to, I don't know, not have very many bugs. We want to collaborate more. We want to, I don't know, stuff like that. Do you do that when you coach? Give them individual goals, so they come up with?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think back to that. So, one of the things I am aware of is like not overwhelming with goals. And so I do like the idea of like, we have a product. So if we're using Scrum, especially, we're going to have a product goal that's giving us like that product focus of like outcome we're trying to achieve, right? We have our sprint goal, that's also kind of shorter time horizon on that. And I do like the idea of teams having like their own kind of continuous improvement goals. So we have a sprint retrospective that's identifying, like what are these challenges we're having, and even if we're not using Scrum, a lot of teams still adopt the concept of having somewhat frequent retrospectives and continuous improvement backlogs. And so, yeah, I think it can be helpful, especially with if there's like a lot of things that it's like, oh my gosh, like there's so many things we need, to improve, or maybe we have like one big thing, right? Like, for example, I worked with a team where they had no test automation and they had a very big product. And it is hard and it takes a lot to go back and like actually implement automation. And it wasn't just test automation, it was deployment automation, lots of things. And we actually did, now that I'm thinking back to it, we actually had a team goal around taking on this big thing that seemed impossible, right? Like we made like a smaller, like kind of a stepping stone goal of like, we're going to focus here on first our deployment, improving the deployment automation. And so we focused there, even though we had like, 10 million other things we wanted to do related to automation. And then it was like, once we achieved that, we then went into test automation and thought, okay, how do we tackle this beast? Right? Like, and so we focused on things like, we're going to need a tool. How do we even pick a tool, right? Like, so we kind of took those small intermediate goals that we were kind of paralleling of like team improvement goals alongside still delivering business value and having sprint goals, and a product goal to focus on in that way. And so they were kind of really nice and they went hand in hand together. Yeah. Does that help?
That was fantastic.
Yeah, good. I have a feeling in your mind, you've got an idea already of like, oh, let's go back to our team.
I've been following what you've been doing for a short while, and yeah, you're teaching me a lot. So has everyone on this call, a lot of the Scrum trainers over the last few weeks.
Fantastic. Yeah. Anyone else have a question? Let's do like one last question or share out.
Okay, I guess I'll steal that spotlight. Returning to the beginning of our conversation, pre-recording, etc., I was actually not once, I quite often have a case when a team is very eager to add their own goal to the sprint, and it has nothing to do with the business. It is exactly about something of their own, like more of a achievement. And it all comes down to the like, oh, if we do this sprint like perfectly, etc., and we add one more extra like technical backlog item to the top to it, it all goes down. It's like, let's get a beer, etc. So, I mean, this is reality, and it is. You're as a Scrum Master, you're trying to steer it towards something business, but at some point when you see the people are being so encouraged by something as easy to be fixed as the let's get a beer, you sort of, I sort of give up, and it's like, yeah, sure, let's add it to the board. But maybe, I don't know, my question is the following, is like, have you ever had something similar where the team would add something on their own and it's not exactly company related or business related or customer related for sake, but still, what would be your advice in this case? Should you go along with it?
Yeah, like, I don't know if I've ever had that scenario. I'd have to think more about it. But the first thing that comes to my mind is, do you notice negative impacts, right? Like, so it's like first, like, what are the problems I see? Like, are there symptoms? Like, like, what are the problems related to it? And if I'm not really seeing any problems, like, I don't know, like, maybe this is just how this team works. This is their personality. This is just a part of who they are, right? Are we still delivering value, right? Do we still have a quality, useful, valuable increment at the end of every sprint, right? Are we focused on value? Do we have value measures? Are we looking at those value measures? Does it seem like we're moving in the right direction? What's the health of the teamwork, right? Like, or those are the types of things I'm going to be looking at. And so, like, if it works for that team and I'm not seeing the negative impacts, then great. That could also shift in 3 months, right? And there might become negative impacts, right? So that's kind of my approach, is to like look at, like, are we still delivering quality, valuable increments? big picture, are we watching the trends? What's happening? Are we staying in tune with our customers? Is teamwork healthy? Is our relationship with our stakeholders healthy? Those are the things I'm looking at. And also I would even say, like, this is kind of tangential, but related a bit to your question. Like, I've even, like, sometimes if teams really struggle with things like quality issues or with teamwork challenges, like they're so used to maybe working in a siloed way, they're hesitant to get out of their comfort zone and like only work on the skill that they're really good at. I also, and others might disagree with me on this one, but if there's a sprint goal that's going to be around teamwork and how we improve the quality of how we're working and how we're growing our skill set across the team, some people might argue, well, if that's not customer value specific, that's not a good sprint goal. I don't know, like, that helps us deliver customer value if we start to grow our skills across the team and have less bottlenecks, right? And be able to deliver, so like, that's another way to look at that as well, as maybe that is okay to be a sprint goal for a period, certain times it makes sense for us. So I try not to judge too much what people make their sprint goals, as long as we are kind of intentional about it and having perspective around it. Yeah, does that help?
Yeah.
Great.
Inspect and adapt.
Yes, inspect and adapt.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to turn it back over. I do want to, before I do that, I do want to encourage everyone again, just a reminder to donate. The information was in the Zoom chat. And of course, I'm sure it's going to be on the webpage as well if you're watching the recording. Thank you all for the engagement. I love that we were able to have kind of a more interactive, intimate conversation around, some of the things that we're seeing, that we're struggling with, some of the tips that we can take out into the world and help ourselves and our teams and our organizations. So thank you all. And I'm excited that I was able to have this opportunity to support the initiative as well. So be sure to donate Agile with Ukraine. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, our hosts.
Thanks a lot, Stephanie. Thanks a lot. It was a very good presentation. I really appreciate how much precise you were. It was really awesome. So thank you everybody for being with us. So tomorrow we also have two great speakers. Tomorrow we'll have Simon Flossman and Jesse Howing. Those guys are the stewards of Scale Professional Scrum course at scrum.org. So if you want to find out more about scaling Scrum, you should come tomorrow as well. Thank you, everybody. Remember to donate and stay safe.
Thank you.
See you
Thanks,
later.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And thank you, Stephanie, for